A tešíme sa, ak ste si užili aj vy. Sledujete nás online v tomto ročníku a ideme to tu trošku prestavať v najbližších minútach. A od Dní architektúry a dizajnu sa presunieme opäť do Clubovky. Pôjdeme do takého špeciálneho formátu o výnimočných umelcoch, ale aj remeselníkoch. A v Clubovke sa stretávajú dobrá káva, dobrý dizajn, dobrá architektúra, dobrí ľudia a dobrý večer. A určite budeme takým dobrým večerom pokračovať o malú chvíľu. Vítajte v Clubovke a pokračujeme aj v nasledujúcich minútach dizajnom a konkrétne svietidlám, pretože práve nimi sa zaoberá náš ďalší partner, vďaka ktorým organizujeme toto krásne podujatie. No a pozrieme sa teraz na prácu nášho partnera spoločnosti FLOS.
Magari in particolare più importante di tutto l'oggetto è magari il suono di questo interruttore.
FLOS, ďakujeme veľmi pekne za to, že máme aj tento rok takú skvelú klubovku. Tatiana Kolárová je samozrejme spoluorganizátorkou a spoluzakladateľkou Dni architektúry a dizajnu spolu so Števom Polakovičom. No a my teda v Clubovke pokračujeme ďalej. Zameriame sa teraz na tých skvelých dizajnérov s talianským pôvodom a ako už Táňa spomenula, tak veľký popularizátor dizajnu, architektúry, novinár Adam Štěch uvedie nasledujúcich hostí a teda aj si s nimi podebatuje. Adam.
Díky za slovo, díky Clubovce, díky festivalu DAAD. Vítám vás u přednášky studia Formafantasma. Hello, Formafantasma, hello.
Hi.
Is it Andrea or Simone? Simone, and you will be alone, or?
Yes, just me. You will be. You will need to be happy just with me.
Okay.
I hope that's going to be fine.
Okay, of course. We are happy to have at least half of the studio of Formafantasma here. Mm-hmm. I will just very shortly introduce your work or your studio in Czech language, and then
Please.
I will give you. Give you the moment when you will start to talk. Tak ještě pro naše diváky, abychom je uvedli do kontextu, myslím, že toto je docela historický okamžik na československé designerské scéně, protože tuším, že ještě studio Formafantasma přednášku v našich zeměpisných délkách a šířkách nemělo. Tak pro mě to je obrovská podsta uvést tuto přednášku. Já si troufám říct, že studio Formafantasma je opravdovým skutečným lídrem současného designu a jeho směřování Ne proto, že navrhují krásné objekty, jako třeba svítidlo FLOS, nebo pro značku FLOS, které tady můžeme vidět, které je celou dobu na scéně, ale především proto, že nastavují naprosto nové koncepty a systémy, ve kterých designéři mohou pracovat. Studio Formafantasma vzniklo na Eindhovenské akademii designu spojením vlastně dvou, tedy jeho zakládajících členů, Andrea Trimarchi a Simone Farresin, kteří se na této škole, která je zaměřená na velmi taky konceptuální, experimentální design, sešli, tuším, že to bylo v roce 2009, a poté začali společně tvořit projekty, které opravdu rozšiřují, řekněme, spektrum designerské činnosti, vůbec možnosti, jakým způsobem se designér může vyjadřovat, jak se může zapojit do nějakého celkového kulturně společenského dění. A jejich projekty jsou velmi komplexní. Není to opravdu o, řekněme, té tradiční definici designu, která by mohla být z dob Bauhausu z 30. let, že zkrátka dáváme dohromady nějakou estetiku a funkci, řekněme výtvarnou stránku a tu praktickou stránku, ale právě s designéry, jako je Studio Formafantasma, se ten potenciál designu a tohoto oboru velmi rozšiřuje do, řekněme, aktivismu, do určité sociální kritiky, do vědy, historie a dalších těchto témat. Samozřejmě tyto projekty vám určitě, nebo způsob práce, jakým Studio Formafantasma pracuje, tak vám detailněji přiblíží Simone, a mně už asi nezbývá nic jiného, než mu předat slovo. Simone, this is your time. You can start with your lecture. We are very looking forward. And approximately in 55 minutes, we will have some little discussion after your talk. So thank you very much. Good luck.
You're welcome, and thank you for having us. So before to share a presentation, I hope I will not repeat what was already said, but I thought it was better to say a few things about us, about the studio. So as probably was already said, me and Andrea, we're both Italian. For a very long time, we have been based in the Netherlands, while in this moment, our studio is actually based in Milan and Rotterdam. We have a smaller studio in Rotterdam. We just moved to Milan after many, many years in the Netherlands, where we are, in any case, still keeping an office, and also where we are very much involved with education, with the Geodesign Master Program and Design Academy in Eindhoven, which started more or less 1 year ago. And I just wanted to mention this because education is really part of our practice. It is not sort of a side of what we do, but it's extremely important to us. We do so because there's many things that we can do as designers, but we believe that the impact that a practice can have should always be fostered also in the realm of education. There's many ideas that we have that are more radical than the things we do. At the end of the day, we are a commercial design studio. We run on commissions. We are not an academic studio. You know, we don't work in academia. So many of the more radical ideas we have can blossom maybe thanks to the work of other designers or young students that can be even more, or hopefully much more radical than the way we are. And that's why we are interested in education. We also have been establishing a program in Sicily since a few years, and also summer school in Sicily that will reopen hopefully very soon, since COVID seems to be slightly more under control. And for tonight's presentation, since you have been, I think, already extensively speaking about floss, and you also are looking some of the things we did hanging there in the space, we are not going to talk about any of the things we have done with industrial production or with the partners we have been working with, but more we will talk about our more experimental work, because in any case, it's where our practice is more rooted. And instead of showing only the latest works, the latest developments of our studio, we decided to make a selection, which is starting actually from when we were still students, so that maybe you have the chance to see a trajectory in our work and the way it is developed. It has been developing in this 10-year and more of practice. So I'm going to share now the presentation. Bear with me, of course, doing a lecture from afar is never as pleasant as being in the studio. I all the time have the feeling that I'm talking just with myself, so I can't wait to actually have the chance to engage with you in a conversation. But let me first share the screen. So as I said before, I wanted to start showing you a very, very old work of us, of me and Andrea. It's actually a work we developed when we were students, so extremely old. But I think it signs a way of looking to design. I think it's still totally present in our work. It's a series of ceramic pieces that we have been developing, thinking about the role of tradition and craftsmanship in the construction of national identity. We have been looking into the tradition of maiolica and ceramic in Sicily, and inspired by an artwork, which is a vase with the face of an African Arab, which we thought it was looking at least rather insulting, because it basically was making use of blackface to make decorative items. We digged into the history of this piece, which is considered traditional in Sicily, to understand its origin. And the origins links back to when the tradition of maiolica, of ceramic, has been imported in the southern regions of Europe due to the medieval conquest of Islamic powers from the Arab world and the Northern Africa, the Mediterranean, and the importing of this tradition. So this piece, which is now looking extremely insulting, it's in fact a reference to this tradition. But at the same time, this artwork is still repeated nowadays. And since Sicily is at let's say, almost at the entrance or at the forefront of migration flows from Northern Africa to Italy, back then, more than 10 years ago, probably 12 years ago, we started thinking that there was here a friction of, or at least a story to tell of this craftsman that keeps on repeating the past, because they have the feeling their role is protecting local culture, is protecting local identity, while at the same time doing it with an artwork which is actually talking about migration flows and how cultures is actually shifting and tradition is in fact a construct. And what we did is removing the representation of this stereotypical, almost caricature-like vase, which is actually this part here. This is the original vase that we collaged on top of the body. And we created, studying the traditional forms collected in a museum there, narratives connecting the description of Sicily as a Arab Emirates from the medieval time to the contemporary description of the refugee crisis in Italy and the refusal of migration flows from Italians in more recent times. Overlapping the ceramic vessels with the portraits of an existing person, of a real person who was a refugee, who arrived as a refugee, now is settled in Europe. And for us, this was a very critical work that probably the work that we did was the most critical, the most underappreciated, if not even hated, because many people thought this is not about, these issues that are not part of design, but in fact design and object at least they have roles that goes beyond the primal function that has to do with representation of culture and so on. And we thought it was somehow a responsibility for us as designers to engage with tradition in ways that are for us more, if at least more interesting, or at least putting into question the role of design in the representation of national identity. So a work we did many years ago, but here you can see the reason why we decided to include in the presentation is that here you can already see the our approach, the look critically at the role that design has, not only for the good, but also for sometimes the bad. Looking at the discipline of design, not only for its potentials, but also for its problematics, which is a constant in our work. We are deeply engaged in this discipline, the discipline of design, and we recognize there is an expertise that we are sourcing from in industrial design, but we equally are aware that, for instance, the climate catastrophe we are facing is also a responsibility of the industry we constructed and the way design operated as a tool for the promotion of consumerism. Bear in mind, many people could say this is an hypocritical position, since we participate in construction of desirable objects, as probably the lamps that you see hanging there. Nevertheless, we are exactly interested in this position, which is sometimes ambiguous. Some people could say hypocritical, but we are interested in this position of design, which is very much different than the position of art, because it sits in between economic interest, social development, sometimes social justice, sometimes social injustice, ecological and sustainable development, and ecological disasters. The reason why we're interested in design is exactly because of all these ambiguities. So the beginning of our practice, as it shows already that the work we've shown, we were really looking into materials, either for their technical possibilities, or in the case of mollification, also for their symbolic possibilities. Another work we did a few years later that was actually commissioned from a foundation based in Italy called Plant, that was dedicated to the restoration and conservation of objects in plastic. They asked us to develop a collections of objects using plastic for their own collection. The reason why they came to us, it's because they knew probably our aversion, not exactly for the material in itself, but you know, for or more than aversion, our preoccupation for ecology. And they thought, smartly enough, that it was interesting to give us a commission exactly because of that, since it was about thinking about plastic and what kind of plastic should be conserved in a museum or in a foundation, private foundation. And what we did was construct a collections of vessels, resurrecting, I would say, techniques and materials that belonged to the 18th and 17th century, 18th and 19th century, when scientists and researchers were looking in finding materials to imitate more precious materials, such as, for instance, ebony or ivory and so on. And they were looking for materials that was versatile enough that you could mold it. And these first experiments with plastic materials, they were done with the use of animal or plant derivatives. And the collections of vessels you see there, for instance, were made with the use of natural shellac, which is excrement of insects that colonize some trees in the Eastern Asia. And bois, which is a 18th century invention, French invention. Bois means wood, and durci, if I'm not wrong, means hard, so hardwood. And it's a mixture of sawdust and animal blood or egg albumen. And the mix was done in this way because animal blood contains proteins as much as egg albumen. And now we made some tests also with soy proteins. With high pressure and steam, the proteins change and link together, polymerize, and binds the fibers together of wood, and many other resins of vegetable and animal derivatives. Our attempt here wasn't really necessarily to think about industrial applications of these materials, even if with the support of Drog Design, the Dutch platform, we have been looking in the possibilities of 3D printing these materials, of using them as binders for the construction of boards and so on. But our idea here was more to put into question also what plastics are. When we talk about plastic, everybody, have the idea of the iconic, plastic bottle. But plastic, first of all, is a quality of material, of being plastic, or, of being moldable, of being versatile. And plastics are engineered daily. But we thought it was interesting to look back at the origins of these materials when before oil was stepping in the production process of synthetic materials. So it was more, I would say, an anthropological study, I would say, in the past. And this fascination for the past is really part of our work. We don't do that for the sake of nostalgia, as I guess it proved already more than tradition. Our work is not nostalgic at all. We don't think the past is necessarily better. But in the past help us to understand the present, possibly the future, and most of all, time and evolution is not necessarily linear. So there might be ideas in the past, then they might be relevant for today or reinvented today. At the end of the day, we should never forget the concrete, or at least a very early version of that was already discovered by Romans, and it sitted there for centuries and centuries. And at one point, somebody thought of putting steel in it, and then we constructed the whole 20th century, and earlier than that, with this amazing invention. Another work I want to talk about is called the Natura Fossilium. Again, part of an early work. They came from a fascination. Me and Andrea, we, since the beginning of our practice, we have always had an ecological concern. An ecological concern that at the beginning, I would almost say it was not even necessarily thoroughly conceived, but it was more that as a generation, we felt that was our responsibility. There was no other ways of being a designer. And so our attention was always for materials, for processes that we could think they were more sustainable, more durable, they could make sense for the end of the century when we started working and the beginning of the new one. And when we think about the extraction of materials, many of the materials we use are extracted from the underground, and digging the underground has been a constant obsession for humans that could rely basically only on wood when we think about materials that actually are growing out of the ground and providing support for our needs. And of course, this process of extracting minerals is extremely invasive. And when we visited the Etna volcano in Sicily, Andrea, my partner, is Sicilian, we thought it was extremely fascinating to see, is an image of the Etna volcano, to see this lunar landscape, which is completely fascinating. But the volcano is still very much active. It explodes regularly. And then you see all these tourists here, as much as we were, visiting this amazing place, observing the beauty and I would say the sublime of being so close to a volcano, so in danger, but at the same time absolutely safe. And but when you see the volcano explode in the air, this is what happens. For kilometers and kilometers around a volcano, the streets covers with ashes, the houses of people covers with ashes, and then for a few hours, everything is covered in black, and then life starts again. Everything is clean again. The ashes are pulled aside, and life continues. And when we saw that, we thought that the volcano was not like only a spectacle for tourists, but it was actually a site for production. It's just that it was not a mine where humans intrude the land to extract material, but it's actually the mountain that provide material. There is erupting materials and minerals. And we started wondering, what can we do with this? What can we do with this non-extractive ashes that are actually provided by the volcano? And our interest here was because of this fascination, but it was also because when we visited the volcano, the only things we could find along the volcano is either factories that extract basalt for construction. Basalt is basically a volcanic marble or a volcanic stone. You cut it and you process it like marble. Or the collections of ashes for as a fertilizer. And then souvenirs production done with rocks and so on. And starting from this, we started conducting our own experiments, and in conversation with several institutions throughout Europe, and with a hands-on approach to remelting the ashes of the volcano, we looked into the possibilities of these ashes. And when we remelted the ashes, what we realized is the material we were obtaining was very much closer to glass. And these are some of the pieces that we produce. At the beginning, this was a sort of a limited edition project for a gallery. So it started as an exploration, a material exploration that had as an outcome something that was not really for industrial application or for large use, even if that was our fascination. I will not talk in detail about the objects we produced. These were, for instance, produced with the local craftsmen using basalt, and the textile here is produced with cotton mixed with lavic fibers, because with lava you can also create fibers similar to glass fibers, and here they were glass fibers and cotton woven together. And the whole collection was somehow constructing a narrative or a culture that actually is not there, I would say, around the idea of using volcanic ashes. The evolution of this work came to exist many years after, thanks to the support of Jack, who is a London-based editor of materials for architecture, who previously worked with our colleague and friend Max Lamb on another project called Memorial, and focused also on sustainable materials for architecture. And when he saw our work, he definitely saw potential. But we told him, listen, if we are going to do this, if we are going to work together, starting with this idea of using volcanic ashes as a material, let me tell you, it would be a nightmare, because what we did before were prototypes, and for developing, a proper, for instance, lavic glass or material like that, it takes ages. And the work with him, the experience with him, it has been never ending. We have been working for years. We've been trying to do glass bricks with lava. We have been working in Turkey. We have been working in London. We did, several experiments rooted on our early research. And then at the end, at one point, we went back to our first sample. And our first sample that we did in the studio was a piece of ceramic that we filled with ashes. We put it in our ceramic kiln. And of course, the ashes, they melt and they stick to ceramic. And so with him, we thought, okay, let's investigate the possibility of making volcanic ashes glaze. And why was this relevant? Well, we thought this could be relevant because many of the metals used to make glazes, they are actually extracted from the underground. And we also, for another reason, we were intrigued by the idea of developing a product like a tile that, of course, it is always designed based on the aesthetic outcome that you will obtain. And instead, we were focusing on where the material is coming from. So our initial concept was not really to design a tile, but our idea was thinking, what is the aesthetic outcome of rooting our product on a specific locality? And this is the outcome. We didn't, and it was a development that I told you was several years. We have been working with a producer, of course, in Italy that gave us the body, in the ceramic body where we apply the glaze. And as I said, this is the outcome of collections of tiles with different tones of colors that are obtained based on the density of the ashes we apply on the clay. Then, of course, the ashes has been mixed with a flux, which is something that lowers the temperature of melting of the lava and helps the lava to become more fluid. And we thought this was extremely interesting because, for instance, when we were working with the producers there, they were all the time questioning, or the engineers, tell us the aesthetic result you want to obtain, because we can add different chemicals to make that. And we're telling them, like, listen, this is exactly the point. We're not following this process. Even if we are designers, design is not only about the aesthetic outcome. Design is not only about designing shapes, designing forms. It is also about designing a process and following it till the end. And this is the outcome. And what we like about it is that probably one can find other similar tiles on the market. Actually, the glazes are actually quite beautiful and very deep. Many of the glazes now in the market are extremely banal and flat. This contains different nuances. They're very non-uniform and extremely sophisticated, but because they are imperfect. But the idea here was really to follow simply a process. Now we are going to introduce you two works very close to each other and very important to us, that really shows a shift in our practice. Because at one point, the more we develop our practice, the more, even if I haven't show you any of the more commercial works we did for several companies such as Floss, but also we collaborated with Lexus, with Established & Sons, with Fendi and other brands from various industries. At one point, we realized that with our more independent practice, we wanted to develop a body of works that could have relevance that goes beyond our, in a way, our own practice, and it could be even helpful for others. And the chance to sort of scale up the level of engagement of our studio was when, I don't remember anymore when, but many years ago already, 4 or 5 years ago, curators from the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne contacted us to develop a body of work for the first triennial, in Melbourne, dedicated to art and design. And the commission was very broad and open. What we have been told was, you are free to do whatever you want. We are interested in your material experimentation. We are interested in your research, but we are collecting as a museum furniture pieces. So we would like the one way or another, our investigation is ending up in the collections of furniture. And they have been extremely brave because they trusted us in the process, and they gave us basically full freedom. And we started thinking about Australia as a context, at least at the beginning, and focusing on the fact that Australia is one of the few countries of the so-called first world that still has an economy largely based on extractions of minerals from the underground. And this became the starting point. We thought, okay, as designers, we use many metals in what we do every day, and but where are these metals coming from? What is this process of extraction, and so on, and questioning, of course, the ecological impact of this. So at one point in this process, it started very large and extensive, started to focus on a much more specific area, which is the one of the recycling of metals. Because we read this statement on a blog that now is closed, doesn't exist anymore, and then in other publications we found that by the end of the century, most probably, the 80% of the metals we will use for build our products, our houses, will come from recycled sources. Not that the metals will not be extracted anymore from the underground, we hope so, but we have been extracting so many metals from the underground that many resources are already floating on top of the surface of the ground. And the realization of this made us shift context. Instead of focusing on the underground, we decided to focus on what is happening above ground and question also the process of recycling. Because when we talk about recycling, we all the time think of an amazing industry which is actually saving the planet, and that's the case. Nevertheless, when we talk about specific products, and in this case, our research focused on the recycling of electronic waste, we all know there has been an enormous problem for many years. Things are improving because the majority of e-waste for many years, and still now it is happening, were exported in the so-called developing countries. I prefer to say, I don't like this term, I prefer to say economically disadvantaged countries, because products were extremely problematic to recycle because they were extremely complex, and they are still extremely complex. And because the driving force for the exportation of this product was the recuperation of precious metals and rare earths. We all know that in our phones, in our computers, tablets, and so on, metals such as gold, silver, tantalum, and many other rare earths are present to make our circuit boards works. We all are aware of, I guess, these images of the famous images of a dump, which is now much more under control, in Agbogblobashi in Ghana, or Yuyu in China. Also, China is now banning the importation of electronic waste. So things have really changed, but this image is stuck in our mind, I think, the mind of the people. And but I think when we look at the recycling of electronic waste on a global level, we realize there's different ways of recycling electronic waste. And actually, there's many interesting and I would say innovative way of recycling electronic waste in economic disadvantaged countries. In Ghana, for instance, there's many markets, but not only Ghana, all over Africa, but in India, in China, there's many markets where components of old electronic objects can be rebought and re-put in the market to produce new electronics. What we do, for instance, in Europe, is to take computers independently, if they still work, if they have good components, whatever. We take them to a recycling center. The hazardous components, so the batteries are not removed, then everything is shredded, so reducing particles, and then materials are recycled. But it's not a reuse of components, a recycling of materials, even of components that still are working. So this was extremely important to clarify. So the more we're focusing in this investigation, the more we realize there is a design problem, an obvious design problem here, which is the way electronics are produced. Because if they were produced to allow recycling, then these products would not be exported. People would be able to repair their product, and the whole process would be much more in tune with making a more circular economy, and it would allow people to do not trash their products. So to do a more thorough research, we looked into the formal recycling sector. So, you know, with, let's say, with more technology and more available. And we looked into a more informal recycling. It's also the problem of how recyclers find themselves in recycling products when they are not trained, and the dangers they are going through, many in economically disadvantaged country. And we also looked at politics and legislation. So who is creating legislation regarding this? So we'll not go through the whole process, but I think it is important for you to understand when we do work like this, for us, it takes between 1 and 2 years, where we don't work, of course, personally, you know, constantly on this, but people in the studio, they, with some of the resources that we are given by the institutions we work with, and some other times with resources that we put, they investigate this problem, contacting experts in the field. And these are some screenshots of, you know, for instance, Excel files where we keep all our research, where we keep the names of the people we speak with, and so on, in order to create a map of what we're doing. And of course, we have been also speaking with producer, but the only producer that accepted to speak with us was actually Fuji Xerox, because they had a progressive person working for them, Janet Neo, who hosted us in Thailand. She helped us in seeing how they do recycling there, which was an amazing experience. They also had a very interesting business model, which I will not describe now, but absolutely innovative and based not on the recycling of materials, but the repair, reuse of components. And the outcome was, because we had to create an exhibition, was, first of all, a series of interviews we made available for the public with recyclers that take care of cooling devices, or small laptops, small devices, and also who takes care of small electrical appliances, such as vacuum cleaners and so on. And we had to speak with these different recyclers because, of course, the problematics for these products are very different. And with NGOs that are based in India or in Europe, but they act in India and in Burundi and Congo, who are trying to establish more responsible recycling workshops to understand also the struggles they're going through. The reason why we went so expansive, it's because, of course, when we talk about an industry like electronics, of course, we talk about products that travels the world, they're produced with resources from all over the world. They are designed by Western people for Western possibilities of recycling, not from global, from the global perspective. And of course, we want to be a bit more realistic, more understanding also the struggles of other communities. And we also have been speaking with who takes care of legislation, the European Electronic Recycling Association, the lobbies for what they need, basically. Interpol, that takes care also of environmental crimes, the International Police, and the United Nations University. I want to say that all our investigation, actually not all our investigation, selections of the documents we have been reading and interviews we've done is uploaded on oralstreams.com, which is basically a platform which is making our research open. Bear in mind, we still call what we do research. We have been criticized because our work is non-academic. Yes, hello, it's not academic. We don't work within academia. We don't work on an academic level. We are not interested in working on an academic level, but still this is research. We make it available because we think others should be, willing to know with whom we've been, if they're willing to know with whom we've been speaking, if they want to reapply, if they want to reappropriate our research, it is there. If they want to contribute to it, free to do. That's the way we think. And finally, the final work were a series of videos that illustrated several problems. For instance, this was almost an infographic done using old phones and old laptops, where we explain very briefly how the system of recycling works in 5 minutes and the technologies involved. A small video or an essay that looks at the history of plant obsolescence that goes from the electric bulb till the most contemporary examples. And finally, the most important one, an animation that is displaying a series of very pragmatic strategies that we've been compiling thanks to the speaking with all these different practitioners, from recyclers, producers, lawmakers, in order to make the products, they suggest how to make products more repairable and more recyclable. And I will not show the film because it lasts 20 minutes, but I can give you some examples of the banality of some of the strategies we came up with. Banal, I say banal because they are, so obvious that it could be implemented, but apparently, they're not really there. So one of the problem we realized, for instance, is that when materials are shredded, also electric cables are shredded, but sometimes black rubber that coats copper in electric cables is so dark and opaque that often visual detectors miss some particles and throw the components of cables that contains copper, which is quite a rare material, in the wrong stream of waste, and they are wasted. It's not a big percentage when you talk with a company, but if you think about the global scale, then this is a problem. Miniaturizing, of course, is becoming more and more of a problem, especially when components want to be recycled, because the more a computer or laptop or whatever is small, the more components will be glued. The more they are glued, the more they cannot be extracted, substituted, or reused. We are, for instance, advocating for a universal screwing system. Many companies have their own screwing system, their own ways of locking components, but this is creating troubles when, for instance, not many tools are available to open these products. Batteries are extremely difficult to be removed because everything is glued. But the first things that needs to be done to lower the cost of manual labor in the recycling is to make battery removable extremely easy. The old Nokia was an amazing example, for instance. The Nokia phone, I mean the cellular phone. I can make also other examples. We are advocating for the introduction of a digital passport for the electronics. The idea of the digital passport is becoming more and more common, but back then when we did the work, it was not. Many recyclers do not know what kind of plastic they are recycling. They need to have the internal labs. But what about a small informal recycling in I don't know, Malawi? Do they need to establish their own lab, or should the producer provide more information so that people actually know what they are recycling? And they don't need to burn plastic to see from the colors of the flames what kind of plastic they are recycling. When you open an electronic, and we did open them, and we were in danger, even without knowing it, there are some components that are dangerous to be touched by hand, and there's no visual coding that tells you what is safe and what is dangerous to be touched. There's not even a labeling system that clearly state that. So, for instance, we are advocating for a universal code of coding. So whenever you are in the world, you know what is danger and what is not, what you can handle by hand, or when you need to wear gloves, for instance. I mean, the film is extensive. We provide several strategies, some extremely simple, some that has to do also with legislation. For instance, we think there should be clear legislation that limits the use of fire retardant, not because we want to make our product more dangerous, but many people don't know that when you apply fire retardant on plastics, these render plastics unrecyclable. So providing a clear statement or more specific regulations could help to make plastics more recyclable. Please, if you want to know more, visit ourstreams.com. We also developed for a second iteration of the exhibition for the Triennale in Milan, for the exhibition Broken Nature, created by Paolo Antonelli. Other films, one that was much more extensive, almost a visual essay, that is looking at the problem of the extraction of minerals on a more, I would say, not only global scale, but on a different time scale, looking from the problems of extracting minerals from when meteorites crashed against the planet Earth and imported some fantastic minerals, such as gold, which wasn't existing on planet Earth if it was not because imported from another planet, till the contemporary problems of electronic waste. Of course, we couldn't cover everything, but it is an essay that looks at the complex relationship and the dynamics that created the contemporary industry of mineral extraction, of course, thinking also of colonialism inevitably. And finally, as I said till the beginning, we also had to produce some objects for this exhibition. And these objects are not a solution. So a lot of people, when they look at these objects, they think, okay, this is what they mean. You can extract minerals from electronic waste. You can make furniture pieces for the office. Yes, absolutely, you can do that. But what for us, these objects, they were interesting, is that we didn't use them as a conclusion or as a solution, but more as an excuse to enter in contact with all this recycler, to enter in contact with the people who could give us pieces of electronics to produce objects, but also to extract, let me see if I can find this more detail, gold from electronic boards to actually plate some of the objects we did. So the objects are more a way of course, display what you can do with the recycled metals, but also more a tool for the engaging with producers, with recyclers of these materials. And finally, I have more or less 15 minutes. I want to talk about our latest work. That was probably the most challenging work we have done, but also the one that we are the most proud. It was a commission from Serpentine Galleries in London, which is a museum that usually work with art and design. This was their third design commission, first to Konstantin Grecic, then to Martino Gamper, and lately to us. And they offered us their platform. And what we thought was extremely wonderful of the invitation of Van Zurich is that he said, something that I'm interested in your practice is exactly what you did in Norris Streams, that you reached out, people that work in reality, that they have their practice, they are not designers, and you link to them. And we think this is brilliant, and we would like you to show this approach that you have within our space, and almost in a curatorial setting. And also they said, I'm not interested in serving to do an exhibition about objects, because we are in a museum. And in museum, we want to show the way of thinking of designers. We want you to do, in a way, your manifesto the way you think. But of course, we always work on a contextual level. And what we thought was interesting about the Serpentine Galleries is that it is in the middle of a park. So at the beginning, we were thinking to continue oral streams, but at one point, we were working already with Paolo Antonelli for A Broken Nature. And we thought, why should we talk about electronic waste here in the middle of a park? And then we could not, as designer, avoid thinking that not far away from where Serpentine Gallery is at the moment, in 1851, one of the most important events for architecture and design took place that really completely shaped the way we intend design today. And that was the Great Exhibition of the 51. The Great Exhibition of the 51, we thought was an extremely fascinating event for several reasons. Incredible architecture, the Crystal Palace, who shaped the way we build architecture, just built with glass and steel. Incredible object presented. It was really a display of the possibilities of industrial production. But we can look at this event as a glorious event for the development of industrial design, but we could also be critical with it. One of the things that we thought was extremely fascinating is that the architecture was built by a horticulturist, Paxton, who was invited not anymore to build an architecture for the survival of trees and plants, but for the display of products. And suddenly plants are becoming a form of decoration, as you see here, or they are presented in the exhibition as cutted into material samples for the production of exquisite furniture pieces or other materials for the comfort of humans. So there is a shift here. You have a moment in which really like the idea of industrial design start to really be formed. The exhibition display exquisite object produced with the help of machines, and at the same time, raw materials, most of all imported by other than European countries. And here a link is shown, the link between industrial development and ecological exploitation. And not only ecological exploitation, but also the exploitation of the wealth of the natural resources of other than European countries. So we look at this exhibition also from a critical perspective. And in a way, we started the exhibition from those marginalized plants, marginalized in the Crystal Palace, metaphorically. And the whole exhibition is about the industry of timber. It is not an exhibition about wood. I want to stress on this. You know, we have been seeing many times design exhibitions focusing on the technical possibilities and the performance on a technical level of materials. But we were not interested in doing that. We were interested in monitoring, in understanding the extractions of timber, a bit as we did with ore streams. Why should designer be doing this? Well, honestly, because I want to be informed on an industry that we end up supporting constantly. And because we have been trained first in Italy and later in Eindhoven, what our initial training was in Italy in industrial design. And when you think about industrial design in Italy, you think about furniture. And so wood is extremely a common material, but we wanted to understand, okay, what is this material, how it is grown, you know, how it is treated, and how are the ecological tensions within this industry. And the World Exhibition became a constant collaboration with different practitioners. They have been included in the design show, but they are not belonging in general to the design exhibition. Institutions such as the Kew Gardens in London, the Tuning Institute, which takes care of wood anatomy, so from the scientific world. We had activists with indigenous communities. We had the contribution of Cecil Tolas, a fantastic friend and a scientist and an artist that work with smell. We have been working with a philosopher. So to look at this industry from a critical perspective. I will not spend the time to explain you full exhibition. But as for Aura Streams, we also built a website called cambio.website, where we put the outcome, where we have you have the chance to see a virtual version of the exhibition, and many of the interview we conducted, and some of the documents we've been reading for the exhibition. So it's a sort of an open source platform. Well, something else that probably I should mention also, that the exhibition is now traveling. It was first in London, then in Prato, then it will be in Switzerland, and most probably in Finland and in China. And whenever the exhibition travels, when we can, we implement new works, and we have a policy where when it travels outside Europe, not everything will travel. We don't want an heavy infrastructure for the exhibition. It would not make sense for the exhibition itself. We ship digital content, and we locally rethink it so that it could be more valuable for the local context, but also it doesn't need to involve extensive shipments. The installations were several, and looking at wood from a microscopical level at the beginning. For instance, these installations are looking at a complex relationship there is between wood extraction and the fact that wood contains CO2, that it's a storage of CO2, and the fact that many of the businesses that we know with furniture, and not only furniture, they are based on a constant renewal of products. And this tower, for instance, it's using copies of IKEA stools done with different kind of typologies of timber. And on the walls, there were informations on the quantity of CO2 is contained in every stool. This to understand that to create a positive life cycle, a stool in oak, for instance, which is the one at the top of the pyramid, to overcome the emission of CO2 that will happen once wood is discarded and most probably incinerated, and so re-emitting again CO2 in the atmosphere, should last at least 90 years. Why 90 years? Well, because a tree of oak, to be mature and to absorb the CO2, should at least grow 90 years. So you understand here that this is not only a critique, but it's also an invitation to think about business models based on ecology. So, if we want to really engage with what we do as designers on an ecological level, we look into legality of timber and how many of the objects entering European Union still contain illegal timber. We look into, with the support of the Tuning Institute, we look into the possibility of using wood for the productions of sound, but also at the problem of the productions of paper, which is a huge industry, paper and packaging, and how this is uniforming ecosystems throughout the world. We look at colonialism, exhibiting those material samples that I mentioned before at the Great Exhibition of the 51, because many of the countries that can understand if a material is legal or not legal, then they must have a database from which to compare where material is coming from. We'll explain this briefly. London, for instance, England, for instance, have the ability of testing materials that enter the European Union to understand if they come from legal or legal sources. But of course, the material library that allow them to do this has been extracted from all over the world during colonial time. So it was also interesting to see how some archival pieces of objects that comes from a dramatic colonial time, they are now reconceptualized to be used for fighting illegal logging, fortunately. The exhibition was also addressing the other than European knowledge with the collaboration with an NGO based in Colombia that helped us to communicate with indigenous communities in Colombia. This NGO is providing services to indigenous communities to help them tracking their territory so they can be legally protected. And so by protecting their territory, there is also the protection of the forest. And finally, collaboration with a philosopher, Emanuele Coccia, and with somebody take chair, Philip Patberg, of governance in the Anthropocene. And we drafted a series of speculative documents for governance of forest that goes from a local level to an international level, and even draft a universal declaration of the rights of trees, thinking about trees as living creatures that should have rights, most probably, since they are providing services such as oxygen, they intake CO2, they provide an environment for biodiversity, and so on. And finally, a film developed with a technology called LiDAR that is used generally to map forests to decide which tree to cut. And here is reconceptualized to actually animate the forest. And the philosopher Emanuele Coccia wrote a wonderful voiceover for us, where a creature, which could be the forest or a tree, is speaking back to humans and interrogating on who's probably the most dominant species on the planet, relooking at what we do from the perspective of trees, from the knowledge of trees and not from the knowledge of humans. It was for us a brilliant way of ending the exhibition, questioning also our dominance as species on the planet. Of course, the attempt here is not to find always a solution, but also to question what we do as humans. And at the center of the show, there were other two films. One, a bit as in Aura Streams, looking at the histories, the relation between humans and trees, from how trees, the interactions with trees helped our cognitive system to develop. Once we started handling the first branches, we started creating the first tools, and with that also our brain developed. How we learned to feed ourselves with cooked food that came from incinerated timber, until the most contemporary problems connected to colonial exploitation, and finally the ecological movements of the last century. And another film developed with Vanessa Richardson of the London Investigative Agency that tries to map the status quo of the certification schemes for timber. We thought of having these placed in the middle of the show as films that could provide the basic information needed to understand everything else that is rotating around the exhibition, which was really this community of decent people, which generously enough supported us for the show. And they were finally part of the design conversation within a museum. These are screenshots of the website I mentioned before, Camilo.website. We also provided during the lockdown, because the exhibition opened basically 2 weeks before the lockdown in London, a series of talks online on Instagram. And the project is now developing in new forms, also in collaboration with the Artek, the Finnish company founded by the Altos, providing not only outcomes that could be end up in an exhibition, but possibly new directions for the company, for Artek, to make what they do, which is already amazing, but even more so focus on ecology and on the forest. We are advocating for a company that is not design-based, but forest-based in first place. Thank you for listening to me for such a long time. I guess you are exhausted to hear me speaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simone. First of all, thank you for all your great dedication and the complex projects you are doing to make our world better, I think, for the future. I think probably you are the next generation of, or new concept how we can see design and the role of designers for today's world and for the future, because even already on the Bauhaus, the designers were dreaming to make the better world through their products, through their visions. And I think you extend this idea of design a bit more into some different context, and to really broaden and open the design as a field for not just creating objects around us, but for communication mostly, and to spread the informations and to set somehow some strategies for the future in many disciplines. which is great. So I think it's kind of, I think you are one of the leaders of this new movement of, let's say, processual design or performative design or information design, social design, maybe like Studio Swine or the studio forensic architecture. I would like to ask you if you still feel more as a designer or rather as artist or a social worker or a scientist.
Yeah, no, definitely a designer. Scientist, not for sure. Our approach is not scientific. As I said before, it's not even academic, and it doesn't pretend to be. But there's several ways of doing research, you know, and we are doing so because we have questions. You know, when the direction our practice took, it didn't came. It came for sure because of our own interest, but I think it came also as a consequences of being trained as designer and also wondering, you know, what are the ethical implications of being a designer? Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, when you work, you have questions and you start wondering, what is my role? What am I doing here? You know, what am I contributing to? I think we all have ethical questions regarding our own discipline. I think, you know, if I would be a journalist, I would not sleep at night probably. So the reason why our practice it is what it is, I think it is deeply a consequence of how design developed. Thanks also to people like in the School of Ulm or in the Bauhaus, which never saw design just as a tool in the hands of economic interest, but also as a tool for social justice and social development. And we still see design in this way, you know. Of course, design can also be frivolous at times, and we are definitely interested in beautiful things, and we still love design also because of that, and I'm not ashamed of that. Nevertheless, there are questions we're trying to engage with, and we feel that it is our responsibility to do so. You know, I would be so bored also, honestly, to be only thinking about, you know, how to make a curve of a table, or, you know, it would be so anachronistic to be doing that only. It's just like not the world we live in, you know. There's amazing designers that can focus on that, and I admire their work, but it's simply not what we can do. I don't, you know, we probably don't have the talent. We don't have that interest. So this is just what we like in a way.
Yeah, and you are the former students of Eindhoven Academy in Netherlands, and it was kind of the school which was associated with the Droog design movement. Do you feel as a successors of Droog movement, or was it really a crucial moment in your career to be there in Netherlands, where maybe 10, 15 years ago was really strong movement of this experimentation?
Absolutely. Why we left Italy after our bachelor, it's because we felt that in the Netherlands there was a generation much closer to us that had a voice which was stronger than in Italy. Droog design was was theorized by Rainer Makers and by Gijs Bakker almost as an antithesis to Memphis, the postmodern movement initiated by Ettore Sottsass in Italy. Nevertheless, we all the time thought there were many connections to what was happening in Italy and what was done in Holland, just with a different attitude. But for us, it was definitely important to be there to learn how to be a designer that is not a tool for the industry, but is also questioning the industry. That was the reason why we went there, and we thought we could re-engage with more radical ideas, which they were there in Italy. But you know, if I think about radical design, you know, amazing works, amazing authors. But the beginning of the 2000s, the situation in Italy was much more boring, and sadly, the idea of Italian design, sense of it, you know, made in Italy, it all became a brand, and it all became a way of selling things instead of then questioning things. Fortunately, things are changing, and I think Italy has an amazing design history with authors that has been really questioning the role of design. I'm thinking of Enzo Mari, of course. But it was extremely important for us to be in the Netherlands, and that's the reason why we are still in the Netherlands heading the geodesign department, because we still love Design Academy, because it gave us a lot. Of course, it's not a perfect institution, but it is an institution which gave us freedom. It gave us the opportunity to think, and so we're still there.
Yeah, but
in a different way, but we're still there.
But personally, you recently moved to Milan back again, no?
Yes.
And do you think that the situation in Italy changed, or is there any new, let's say, Italian design renaissance recently?
I don't know. I mean, definitely, I think Milan is a very interesting city in this moment. What I think is that design, you know, I see we welcome students for instance, in Eindhoven from all over the world. So I'm really not interested in talking about design on a national level. And I'm not interested in that, because that's always appropriative marketing. Mm-hmm. To talk about Dutch design, to talk about Italian design. And honestly, we felt misfits in Italian design. We felt misfits in Dutch design, because for the Dutch, we were always too Italian, and for the Italians, we were always too Dutch. And honestly, what does that even mean? I don't even know. So while I can see differences in attitudes and so on and so forth, I think the understanding design on a national level is really not interesting. Mm-hmm. It's also not useful. It's much more important to look at design as a discipline which has global connections that develop globally, and that probably then has also global responsibilities. You know, we have seen also the downside of, you know, of how the Bauhaus has been exported as a model over the world, even in parts of the world. I'm thinking, for instance, Brazil, where industrial production was not even there, so it was not even making sense. But the heritage of that is that there is a global understanding of design, and I think design can act, you know, from that global perspective, but correcting it, thinking about what can design as a practice do for the planet. Do you know what I mean? On a global level.
Yeah, and you still work for companies. Here we have the lamp for floors we mentioned already. You did a lot of other projects for some glass companies or other. Is it for you a necessity to make your living next to your research and more, let's say, artistic projects, or do you still love to design details of the lamp or a table?
Yes, no, we still enjoy that. I think for us it's important to have different outlets, and there are different reasons why we like that. Well, first of all, I want to say that not necessarily you make a living when you work with companies, because they're still stuck in this idea that they should pay you only with royalties, which is of course a very old-fashioned ways of doing that. And there's always an attempt, not at least from the company we work with, that I can say it for sure, to really exploit creativity. You know, for some reason you can always pay a photographer to take pictures of a product, but you cannot pay a designer to develop it. So I'm very critical with that. And I think I can blame also the generation of designer before ours. They didn't, stood up for their creativity. And I think it's important to say that. So we do that also because of economic reasons. We also do because there are also amazing companies that do amazing works. And they access technologies we cannot access. They have knowledge we don't have. And so it is amazing to work with them. So when we work with Floss, we always learn. You know, so it's always an opportunity, and you can also understand much better why things are so complex, why it is difficult to make changes, why companies are sometimes afraid, why they don't have the knowledge. why they don't have a sustainable department, why they don't know what to do with sustainability. Sometimes they don't even have the scale that allow that. Sometimes they don't even have the time because they're busy thinking how to pay the salary to the people working for them. So for us doing these works are ways to make compromises, wonderful compromises, because when you work with flaws, it's wonderful compromises. But it is also a way to be in touch with reality. Again, we are not working in academia. And we are also proud of that. Not because we want to dismiss academia, but simply because only if you understand this, you can understand our work. And so, for instance, you mentioned before forensic architecture. We really admire what they do. And it's completely different to what we do. There are, I guess, things in common, but it's very different. But what they do comes from a perspective which is different. Our work is in the mud of production. They are much more interested in thinking about applying architectural knowledge for social and environmental justice. And they have a direct impact on reality, and I admire them so much for that. It's unbelievable what they do and the integrity of their work. But our practice is completely different. It has to do with the making of things, with the production of things. That's what we are interested in.
And all your projects, as you showed, are very complex. I have to say, I can't imagine how much time you have to spend on the research, or how this process works. Do you have a lot of employees or a lot of collaborators? How does it work?
Yeah, well, no, there's never really a lot of people, but working with us in this moment in the studio, we are so one person, almost two, becoming two in Rotterdam, and then we are in 6 to 7 in Milan. But when we work in a research-based project, generally there is at the beginning one person working, and then but working only on that for at least a year. And the process is always reading literature, books, and then publish materials online, then reading directives, so political documents, legislation, then reaching out to people, creating a network of people that allow us to create almost a family, explaining what we do, why we do it, and generally people are extremely open to engage with us and very generous with their time. So then we basically built a family, and there is a lot of basically office work, which is about writing emails. It's a lot of actually, Excel sheets and names and emails and transcripts of interviews and editing of interviews and long discussions.
You are doing yourself, for example, the interviews, or your colleague?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
Not always.
Not always.
Not always. Also people in the studio, always with our overview. So there are regular meetings in the studio with the people working for us. Sometimes the people work for us, they even read the books that we don't have the time to read. So, and then they tell us, well, this book is amazing for this part, and then we read some things, they read others. And then it's, sharing a bit of knowledge and, and systematizing these materials. The reason why some of the websites that we did exist, it's because it's a way for us to keep track of some of the documents we read, the most interesting ones. So it is extremely difficult to keep track of research, honestly, which is something we're also often talking with students in geodesign, because it is really much of a pity if then you do the research and then you don't make it available for others. But then if you want to make it available for others, you also need to systematize it a bit. But the reason why, for instance, we love a very traditional way of doing research, which is doing interviews, it's because when you speak with practitioners that for instance, belong to the scientific world, they will always say things they are not allowed to say when they publish a paper, a scientific paper, because they cannot write their opinions. Of course, fortunately, they cannot write their opinions in scientific papers, but they cannot address their discipline on a more broad perspective. And then when they engage in a conversation, they are much more free to engage with ideas they cannot publish. And I think that's amazing.
In the case of Orestream, you mentioned that a lot of people thought that the furniture you designed, it's your solution of recycling. I mean, it's quite a pity that you do such a huge research, like 2 years, 3 years researching, doing all the interviews, everything, and then people kind of, or majority of people maybe, just saw the pieces themselves, just these artworks basically.
Yeah.
Do you have a problem to explaining your projects to public?
Sometimes, yes, we do. But also, I care till a certain point. We care till a certain point because, well, we develop several things. We develop the objects, we develop the film, and we speak about our work, so we can explain ourselves. And then I also know how I was. Sorry, I need to take to respond to this question. I'm going to take a detour. I remember how I was myself when I was a kid, and the things that speak to me, they weren't written in books. They were things. They were objects. They were paintings. They were sculptures. Those were the things that they spoke to me, and I came to understand the world through things that were visual. And I always discovered that all the artists that I loved the most, and they were just fascinating for me on a visual level, when I was digging into their work, their work speak to me also on terms of the concepts of the work, not only on a visual level. So that meant that the visual things that were for me seductive or interesting or curious, they were telling me things about myself, about who I was. So if people approach our work because they find our work aesthetically fascinating, probably they will also find out all the other layers of meaning about our work if they dig deep.
So it's, let's say, kind of eye-catcher to start to go more deep into the informations, into the...
I wouldn't say that it's only about something being an eye candy. I wouldn't say that. It's just that you understand things reading a book, and you understand things also looking at a piece of furniture or a sculpture or simply a tree or the world. We're just humans, so things speak to us in multiple ways. So in a way, I don't even mind that if people only see that. Apart from the fact that the objects, when you look at them, the way they are constructed, they inevitably you should ask yourself a few questions if you see them. They are never so cryptic. They always embed. They are narrative in themselves. They tell stories in themselves. So you should ask yourself, okay, what is this story? And if you want to engage with that story, you will engage with also the rest. But also, for instance, when we did Cambio, we avoided to have this part, for instance. So we did more installations, and we published a catalog, which is now the 3rd edition. So there's several ways you can speak to people, you know. So maybe something we understood with Orestreams is that maybe it is also good to show the objects alone and show the videos and the research alone. So that they have the different lives. And for a next exhibition, Design Museum, for instance, that's what we're doing. We're presenting only the films.
Okay. Thank you very much for your talk, for your explanation of your point of view on design and design industry. Thank you for your answers. Thank you to all. And say hello to your partner, Andrea, and hopefully see you next year in April in Milan for Salone, for example.
I really hope so.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
So Simonom Farresinom sa rozprával Adam Štěch. Adam, veľká vďaka aj tebe za to, že si prijal pozvanie a teda zúčastnil si sa programu Dni Architektúry a dizajnu a Clubovky, v ktorej sa práve nachádzame. Skvelé rozhovory. Ďakujeme pekne.
Děkuji.
A ja som zachytil, že ty si aj bol v Taliansku navštíviť týchto hostí.
No, ne úplně navštívit. My jsme tady byli s partnerkou před 2 týdny na Salone del Mobile, vlastně na přehlídce dizajnu, největší přehlídce dizajnu světa v podstatě, která 2,5 roku nebyla už, protože samozřejmě během pandemie se nic nedělo. A zcela výjimečně místo dubna se uskutečnila tedy letos v září a my jsme byli shodou okolností pozváni na jednu velmi zajímavou večeři pořádanou módní značkou Sunej, která je takovou teď velmi progresivní značkou v Miláně, módní. A tam jsme náhodně u stolu asi o 5 míst od nás seděl právě Andrea, tedy Simoneho parťák, a tak jsme si vyměnili pár slov a jenom jsme si řekli, že se uvidíme tedy během dneška, akorát Andrea tady nebyl teď, takže...
Fantastické, no tak doplnil si toho druhého.
Přesně.
Z tej dvojice. Bolo to výborné počúvanie. Aký je vlastne, Adam, tvoj vzťah k Dňom architektúry a dizajnu? Lebo ja si pamätám, že sme sa aj minulý rok spájali, kedy si online, aj ty teda sa zúčastnil toho prednášania na Dňoch architektúry a dizajnu. Tak ako sa to stalo? Kedy ste sa dali dohromady s týmto podujatím?
Já nevím, to je tak dva roky asi nejdříve s Clubovkou. A já si myslím, že tady s klanem Kolárovic, jako kteří, musím říct, že dělají úžasnou práci a moc si toho vážím. Podívejte na tu plejádu špičkových umělců, dizajnérů, architektů, kteří tady byli během Clubovky. Takže pro mě to je jenom čest spolupracovat s lidmi, kteří opravdu mají pro svůj obor vášeň a nedělají jenom z nějaké módy nebo trendu, že je design zrovna teď in, ale že opravdu to cítí ve svém srdci. To mě velmi baví.
Ty zase patríš takisto medzi ľudí, ktorí to myslia vážne a teda ktorí sa zaoberajú dizajnom a architektúrou. Počuť to teda aj z toho tvojho rozprávania. A čo plánuješ ty ako Adam Štěch, na čo sa môžeme tešiť z tvojej dielne?
Spoustu věcí, plánuju několik projektů, pracujeme na několika projektech s mými kolegy ze skupiny Okolo, takže to jsou většinou výstavní projekty. Teď asi úplně taková největší věc, kterou už vlastně, na které pracujeme asi 4 roky, bude to velká výstava, velká retrospektivní výstava Jiřího Pelcla, českého designéra, té, řekněme, postmoderní generace 90. let. Tak mu děláme, nebo vlastně během celých těch 4 let jsme připravovali jeho velkou výstavu a zároveň velkou monografii, která vyjde k této výstavě v Moravské galerii v Brně. Vernisáž je tuším někdy v polovině listopadu a je to výstava přes celé jedno patro velkého jako muzea, takže poměrně hodně práce, takže to nás zaměstnávalo. Ale těch projektů je mnohem víc, ani bych je tady nestačil všechny vyjmenovat, ale na co třeba se tak osobně jako velmi těším, tak to je takový ten můj opravdu jako osobní věc, srdcová záležitost, tak konečně jsem se dostal k tomu, že začnu připravovat moji knihu krbů, protože já cestuju po architektuře, navštěvuju interiéry, a zjistil jsem, že za těch asi 15 let, co takhle za interiérovou architekturou 20. století jezdím po celém světě, tak jsem nashromáždil asi 250 fotek krbů. Různých krbů od různých špičkových architektů, designérů, umělců a chtěl bych udělat tady tu knížku, takže to bude taková jako galerie této velmi zajímavé typologie, která je někde na pomezí právě designu a architektury.
Perfektná téma. Ďakujeme ešte raz, že si tu bol s nami. Všetko dobré ti prajem.
Taky, děkuji moc. Mějte se hezky.